Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be the worst books and the most disappointing books that I read in 2021. So without further ado, I'm just going to start with all of the books that I DNF'd. Then I'm going to list off all of the books I gave 1 or 2 stars, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the 5 books that I thought were most disappointing for me that I read in 2021. This does not mean 2021 releases. If you're a frequent watcher of my channel or booktube in general, then you probably figured that out already, but I know some people are new. These are not just books that were released last year. These are just books that I read last year. So without further ado, I'm just going to start with the books that I did not finish in 2021. And I did not finish Apple, Skin to the Core by Eric Gansworth, Point Made by Ross Guberman, Smoke City by Keith Rawson, Middlemarch by George Eliot, and The Quantity Theory of Insanity by Will Self. Next, I'm just going to list for you all of the books that got either 1 or 2 stars. I changed my rating system partway through the year, and I don't know how this impacted the number of books that got 1 or 2 stars, but I did definitely give more 1 or 2 star books at the end of the year. Now, 1 star is a book that I hated, and 2 stars is just a book that I didn't like. So I have The Friend Zone and Life's Too Short by Abby Jimenez, Candide by Voltaire, Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, Lent by Joe Walton, The Merry Spinster by Daniel M. Lavery, Boomer One by Daniel Torday, The Best Damn Answers to Life's Hardest Questions by Tess Coman, Wanderers by Chuck Wendig, Salem's Lot by Stephen King, The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, Death in the Park by London Lovett, Dune by Frank Herbert, My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, and Behind the Red Door by Megan Collins. Now I'm just going to start with my 5th most disappointing book and build up to my number 1 most disappointing read of the year. These are not necessarily books that were quote-unquote bad or that I didn't like. They were just books that I expected to like a lot more than I actually wound up liking, and that is for a variety of reasons that I will get into as I discuss each of the books. The number 5 most disappointing book that I read this year was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a mystery thriller. I would say it's closer to a mystery than it is a thriller, although it does quicken the pace at the end. This book is nearly 500 pages long. It's 450 pages long, and I think it probably could have stood to be cut down by about 100 pages. The main reason I was so disappointed by this is because so many people raved about this book on BookTube just in the past couple of years, and I believe Books with Emily Fox is the one who really got me to read this. We have pretty similar tastes in hard science fiction, and this has a sort of time travel, time loop element, which is something that I typically really enjoy. I just felt like this book was way too long. The premise of this is a man wakes up one morning on the grounds of this mansion, and there's been a party, or there's going to be a party, and he knows that he has to stop the death of Evelyn Hardcastle or figure out who kills her. 7.5 deaths is because she dies 7 times. He has 7 days to figure out what is happening and who is the culprit of who is the murderer of Evelyn Hardcastle. I'm doing a really bad job of explaining this, but I genuinely have not thought about this book in months because I was so disappointed by it. But essentially, it's this guy who wakes up and has to solve this mystery, but he wakes up in a different body each day. So he learns a little bit more about it as the week goes on, but he's living the same day over and over and over again for 7 days. It sounds like a really intriguing premise because it is. I just thought this book went on for way too long. The 4th most disappointing book I read this year was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, which is the 2nd Emily Henry book that I read. I read Beach Read last year. I read Beach Read as well in 2021. I read it over the summer, and then I saw that People We Meet on Vacation was nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award. Why did I say it like that? A Goodreads Choice Award. And it was available as an ebook for my library, so I read it really quick, and I was really disappointed with this one as well. So People We Meet on Vacation is essentially a love story between 2 best friends from college, and the premise is that every year they go on this vacation together. They've always been platonic, but for the past 2 years, they haven't gone on vacation together because something happened on their last vacation that sort of messed up their friendship. And so this follows them in the present day, and they are going on one last vacation, and then also on each of the 10 vacations they've taken in the past. And so you're sort of learning about how their relationship to each other started, how they became friends, and then also where it's gone with all of their different vacations that they've taken and sort of why they fell out of touch. I was disappointed by this because I really enjoyed Beach Read. It wasn't like a perfect romance for me, but I liked the slow burn nature of it. I liked the tension built between the characters, and I felt like People We Meet on Vacation was lacking in every respect. it wasn't even like slow burn. It was just like too slow, if that makes sense. I didn't really buy into why the characters had spent all of this time as friends. I didn't actually buy into their friendship because they didn't really seem to get along that well. I also kind of disliked the way that the author gave them their like quirks, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you've read this book, you might know what I mean. And also their first like romantic scene was kind of the least romantic thing I've ever read, which coming from Beach Read and how well I thought that the romance was sort of put together and like how much I was rooting for the characters, to just not root for them or care at all in People We Meet on Vacation was a big disappointment, especially because the premise of People We Meet on Vacation sounded so good to me. I just didn't love it. The next disappointment, I think, is also going to disappoint a lot of people who watch my channel, because I know this book is so well loved universally, not even just online. It's like my mom's favorite book, one of my sister's favorite books. Like people love this book, and I didn't get it. Like, it was fine. I gave it 2.5 stars. I was like, whatever, you know? And that is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I can already feel people like disliking that I didn't like this book, but it just wasn't good. I didn't feel like it was well written. What I always hear about Kristen Hanna is how like well researched and well written her books are, and this book was neither. I will try to find the Goodreads review that I feel like it's really lengthy and it contains some spoilers, but it really sums up all of the things that I also disliked about this book, which is like, okay, the best example I can give you is there's a scene where they are talking about how I should start over. This is a historical fiction set in wartime in France. I think it's World War II. And it is World War II. I actually remembered one of the plot points. That is the reason that I really hated this book. Anyways, so this book is set during World War II. It follows these two sisters, Vianne and whatever the other one's name is. And the other one, whose name I can't remember, decides to join the resistance for whatever reason. And it's based on a real character in history, I think is why it like makes me so mad. And she just like isn't very good at anything that she's doing, but somehow she's like succeeding at it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then Vianne stays behind. I think she has a daughter, but I could be wrong about that. And she's married, but her husband has gone off to fight in the war, and a Nazi comes and stays with them, and she and the Nazi... Anyways, I hate the good Nazi, like, trope in World War II to, like, make it interesting. They're like, oh, but he's just a person, and I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Visceral hate. I hate it. It's an instant way. I should have DNF'd the book when that started happening, but I didn't. So, that's the premise, right? And we're in the future looking back on this thing. And one of the sisters, I wonder which one survived and has to go to this conference. So stupid. So stupid. I hated it. But there was, that didn't even make sense if you haven't read the book. But there is like a conference in the future where they're like wanting to honor one of the sisters. And one of the sisters is alive, and she has to go to this conference to honor one of the sisters. We don't know which one is alive. We don't know which sister's being honored. I wonder. But anyways, there's a scene where they're talking about how snowy the ground is, right? So they live in this tiny village in France, and it's snowing. Apparently there's like 3 feet of snow, but the roses are still blooming. Doesn't make sense. I don't understand how they think this town of less than 1,000 people would be like cleared up or cleaned out. From the snow, they described a heavy snowfall, like 2 feet of snow, but then the sister who wants to join the resistance finds a Nazi's bicycle, and she steals the bicycle. First of all, how are you going to ride a bike in that much snow? Second of all, they would see, if you could, you'd be leaving tracks through the snow directly to the resistance. Like, they would see it. I just don't get it. It was the stupidest thing I've ever read. It made me so mad. It just didn't make any sense. The book, it just didn't make any sense. And I couldn't get past all of the, like, disparities in the writing, I guess. It just drove me nuts. My number 2 most disappointing book of the year was The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, because, for 2 reasons. One, I hadn't read The Silent Patient at the time that I read The Maidens. I ended up reading The Silent Patient afterwards, and I did really enjoy that book. But when I read The Maidens, all I had heard were rave reviews from The Silent Patient, and I was like, oh great, this is a new release. It's supposed to be like a dark academia thriller. Sounds perfect. And the premise is, it's a psychologist. If you know, Alex Michaelides writes about like psychoanalysts, and that's like all he writes about. But it's a psychologist whose niece, who's basically like her adopted daughter, like she kind of raised this girl from when the girl's parents died. So it's her niece, but like they have a mother-daughter relationship sort of. And her niece calls her from school. I think she's at university somewhere. It might be Cambridge, it might be Oxford, I can't remember. Somewhere in England, I don't know. She calls her aunt and says, hey, my friend has been murdered. Can you, I don't know if she asks her aunt to come or if her aunt just does. But she also describes this like very creepy professor, Edward Fosca, who has this group of girls who follow him around. And one of the girls who follows him around all the time is the one who has died. And it might have been like the niece's roommate or best friend or something. There was some reason, like they were really close, which is why the niece is upset. So the aunt goes to Cambridge / Oxford and decides that she's going to pretend to be a detective. I don't know if therapists are different in England than they are in the US, but therapists in the US are not detectives. So I was very confused as to why she was like pretending to be, like why she was getting involved in this investigation. I didn't think her motivations were very clear. Also, we know that her husband, who was like the love of her life, who she met at this university where their niece now goes, drowned semi-recently. So she's dealing with grief from him drowning. So I think that was part of it, is that she wanted to help Zoe, was that her kid's? I don't know what the girl's name is, but she wanted to help her get through her grief, right? So I think that was part of the reason she was like investigating this, and she is just convinced Edward Fosca is the killer, right? She's convinced. So the reader knows from the beginning that that's probably not what happened, but I digress. I was disappointed by this book for a couple of reasons. One, it wasn't very dark academia, which I think is how people sold it. Yes, there were murders, and yes, it was sort of set at a school, but like, other than that, there wasn't anything that was like dark academia about it. The school setting was more of just like the town around the school and like the investigation. Two, it didn't make any sense to me that the therapist would be suddenly a detective. I didn't get it. I just was like, why? Why would you? I don't understand why you're even still here. I didn't understand why she was so obsessed with what had happened. And I also never really understood why everyone was determined that it was Professor Fosca. Because like, sure, he seemed creepy and like inappropriate, but I just didn't understand where people got the idea that he was the killer. And the real killer I thought was so obvious the whole time. I was like, well, there was one twist that I didn't really love, but I was like, all right, that's an interesting, it like was the motivational twist, I guess, where you learn something at the end and you're like, oh shit, that's interesting. But the actual like big twist that I think a lot of people, I've heard like 50-50. People who loved this book seem to be like shocked by it. I couldn't figure out what else it could possibly be. Like it was the only thing that made sense to me. But when I read The Silent Patient, I also figured out that twist, but I was trying to figure out how it would happen because it like didn't seem like it could, but then something else happens and you're like, oh, okay, there it is. If that makes sense. If you've read either of these books, I hope you know what I mean. I don't want to spoil it, obviously. The Maidens was a disappointment for me. I didn't love the way it was told. I thought there were too many red herrings that didn't make any sense. But anyways, the number one most disappointing book that I read this year, I talked about kind of recently. And that's A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And the only reason this is a number one disappointing book is because I thought I was going to give this 5 stars. This sounded exactly up my alley. I thought this was going to be like my favorite book of the year. And it wasn't. I almost DNF'd it. I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. I ended up giving it 3 stars, and I am interested to continue in this Scholomance series. But this is book 1 in the Scholomance. It is about a girl who goes to a magic school. In this world, your magical abilities develop when you like hit puberty. And then monsters are like trying to eat you for your magical ability. It's called mana that you have. And monsters want to eat the mana, so they really heavily attack like teens and like post-pubescent, current pubescent, I don't know, pubescent people who are developing mana for the first time. I don't really know why they stop when you like are like 18, 19, when you like hit adulthood. It didn't really explain why. I think part of it is that you essentially are trained at that point so that you're not as easy of a target. But you go to the school where you get locked in and monsters are trying to break in all the time, and the school is in the void. So it's not like, it doesn't exist here on Earth. It exists elsewhere. They don't really explain how or why, but it does, which is fine. I don't care. But there's different types of magic that you can have, which I thought was cool. So one of the things that I really enjoyed is our main character, who is the worst character, one of the worst characters I've ever read from. I've now read from a worst character, but one of the worst characters I've ever read from. I really disliked her. I disliked her interactions with everybody. I thought she was so annoying and petty, and that's one of the reasons I like almost put this book down, but also the style that it's written in is just really not for me. It just wasn't for me. It's too YA, I think. But it's too like angsty YA. I'm not into angst, I don't think. I'm 26 years old. I'm too old for angst at this point. I feel unattached from everything that's happening here. What I did really enjoy about this book, what I wound up really enjoying, is the magic system, or the magic that the main character utilizes, is languages. So they use spells in this magical world, and you can learn spells in a ton of different languages. So our main character is taking courses in like 6 different languages so she can learn spells in those different languages so she can know more spells, because that's a way to like gain more power. So I thought that was really interesting. And I neglected to put that in my 5-star predictions wrap up, which I will link for you if you missed. I gave this 3 stars. It was really leaning towards 2 for most of the book. And then some things happened towards the end. We saw some character development. Still not in like her attitude, but like in certain things. And yeah, I ended up not hating this book, but I definitely didn't love it, which I was hoping to. And I just wanted this to become a new favorite series. The magic school thing, I've been looking for a book that has a magic school in it that I can love as much as the Harry Potter books pretty much since J.K. Rowling outed herself as a TERF. And I thought this might be it, and it's not. So that's disappointing. So that's that. Those are the 15 books I gave 1 or 2 stars, 5 books I DNF'd, and 5 most disappointing books that I read this year. Again, none of these, okay, I know I talked a lot of shit about the Nightingale, but I really don't think any of these are bad books. They just weren't books that I liked. If I'm dissing your favorite books, I'm sorry. We all have different tastes. Totally fine. I probably like things that you don't like, and vice versa. Obviously, if you like any of these books, you like things I don't like. But if you like these books, all I'm saying is no hard feelings, okay? But thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it to this point, give me just one of those like angry face emojis. Whatever that means to you. Give me an angry face emoji. And also let me know what your most disappointing book of the year was. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to, you can go ahead and subscribe, because I do post 2 videos every single week. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.